Welcome to the Business of School podcast, brought to you by Cole Connect. Get ready for a journey of topical insights, engaging conversations, and maybe a few aha moments from the business, finance, and technology side of schools. Cole School experts are your host, and with our guests from the world of education, we're about to embark on a learning adventure to support you in the business of your school. Dr. Selena Fisk is a data storyteller, dedicated to helping educators transform numbers into meaningful narratives that create positive change. With 16 years of teaching experience in Australia and the UK, Selena empowers educators, school leaders, and school systems to build data-informed cultures. She has authored 4 books, an online data storytelling course, and is the creator of the Make Data Talk podcast. Selena supports system leaders, school leaders, middle leaders, and teachers worldwide to use data strategically, ultimately enhancing outcomes for young people. Well, welcome, Selena, to the Business of School podcast. Thanks for joining us.
No worries. Thanks so much for having me.
And I'm very intrigued to go through the topic of storytelling, and I feel like I'm in the right chair for that today. It's like the storytelling Jackanory chair, so which is going to be fascinating. And I know we're talking outside the podcast before about it. This is a topic which is very passionate and close to both of our hearts. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have around this today. Maybe just to start with, Selena, you could give us a bit of an insight onto some of the work that you're doing in this space with schools recently.
Yeah, so I'm a data storyteller and grounded researcher, which kind of means a couple of things for schools. I help educators make sense of the data and the numbers that they have available to ultimately help them make good decisions in their schools and to think about the narrative and the story that's attached to kids and cohorts and different groups and respond to what they need. And also, I guess, all the non-educators in the school as well, building data literacy, building their capacity to tell data stories. And often that's to an audience, like to a board, to a manager, to a team, like to a leadership team, being able to, I guess, convey data in a way that really motivates them to, or the audience, to do something with the information and really empower good evidence-informed decisions.
But it's not something that you would naturally think of that in the world of a management meeting or board reports with where there's lots of data, lots of figures that we're actually just telling stories. Why do you feel that data storytelling is so important in school reporting?
Yeah, well, I think for starters, all of us have sat in those meetings where it's been done really poorly, right? We may not be able to put our finger on what effective data story.
Spreadsheet overload.
Yeah, absolutely. It's too many spreadsheets, too many visuals, too much talking, not enough processing time, and it's just like next fact after next fact after next fact. And that, I guess, what we know now is that the best way to communicate numbers, and there's a whole lot of work in this space around communicating scientific research and the power of communicating research through the lens of a narrative, because a narrative, like like when we watch a movie or we read a book, there's a deliberate narrative arc where there's a whole point to the movie or a whole point to the story. And there's like a building of tension. There's, a big kind of fight or climax at the end. There's a resolution. And in a perfect world, an effective data story actually takes a really similar approach. It's not just more and more information stacked behind one another. When we're doing it well, we're meant to actually be getting people to a point where they go, yeah, right, like I need to do something about this and I can do something about it. And we're really showing them and almost trying to persuade them and create a case for why they need to act on the data, not just to dump loads and loads of different numbers and charts and spreadsheets in their lap.
I think information overload is something we see far too often. It's probably the number one mistake that happens in any reporting. And I think trying to find that blend, I like the analogy you've got of a movie. There's, between the narrative, the background, the reason why, also the visual side of it is a big part of the storytelling communication. Getting that mix right is very important, and that sometimes as well we feel that a lot of school reporting is done the same each time as well, and this is how we've always done it, this is the format of the reporting, this is what we've been asked to do. But do you find that in schools reporting and the work you've been doing with them as well, that there's a lot of coaching on making them understand exactly what it is that they're trying to portray this instance, and that might be different to what was happening before because of what's gone on in the environment of the school?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, right? Like there are definitely schools where they know what they need to be talking to and presenting, but they're not doing it very well. But then there's also, as you say, there's sometimes a disconnect between, well, this is how we've done it previously, but things have changed or it's moved. Um, and I guess the space I often play in with non educators versus educators in schools, or even to a board, is almost a disconnect between what people believe that they need in those reports. So it may not even be that things have changed. It may be that actually I've worked with data teams in the corporate sector where they have done the same thing for a long time because they've thought that that's what people have needed and wanted. And yet, when I've worked with the other people in the organization who receive the report, they're like, actually, this doesn't tell us what we need. And so sometimes it's a matter of actually bringing the two heads together and going, well, where is the most value for us in the data? What is actually most useful for us in our role? And then the person presenting the report or constructing it, it's their job to think, okay, well then how do I present that in the best possible way? Like there's kind of the two parts of it. And when we are data storytellers, we've really got to think about our audience and what they need. There's no issues with like trying to find more data. Like we have data absolutely everywhere. There's so much of it. We've got to curate the experience for the audience, whether that's in a report or in a presentation. And so when we curate that experience for them, we've absolutely got to know how to cut through the noise of all of those data sets to pick the ones that actually matter. Um, and I make a distinction between like interesting data is like oh yeah, that's interesting, nothing really changes, I walk out of a meeting and I don't think about it again, versus useful is the stuff that is actually going to make me do something with it. So data storytellers are very good at trying to identify what's actually useful, and that's what they're presenting, not just
I
interesting
think it's
data.
actually one of the most key aspects of the whole process, and one which often gets neglected. And
Mm.
everybody, when we're reporting, we all have to report to different audiences, different stakeholders. Um, we we need to make sure we invest some time in understanding who the stakeholders are and what it is that they are wanting that information for. Like that,
Mm.
everybody has a role to play, and everybody's looking for that data so that they can act upon it, like you said. So, what is the objective of the principal, of the chair of the board, of the head of curriculum that you're talking to, whoever it is that you're providing that data for? Just sit down with them
Mm-hmm.
and find out what they're trying to get out of that meeting or that report. I think is a really good place to start. Don't start by
Yeah.
writing the agenda to a meeting, for example. Go to your
Mm.
stakeholders and go, what do you want out of this? And then I know what
Yeah.
reports I need to prepare, how they need to be presented, and what story I need to tell. I think that's a really useful first stage of any data storytelling. Um, because
Mm.
every stakeholder is going to be different, and they may also want a different story this time than they did last time because there's a new challenge they need to get work with, or a new opportunity they need to focus on, and they need different data for it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think about enrollment data. There's a number of different ways that you could look at that or use it. And so different groups in the school are going to want that information for different purposes and therefore want slightly different cuts or sections of it or different visual representations. Like, obviously, at an executive kind of leadership role, and a board would want to know, are enrollments going up? Are the enrollments heading in the right direction? And then if you've got people that work in marketing and advertising, or people liaising, like in a school I worked in a few years ago, they were trying to put on a new bus route to target a new area where they realized that we were getting no enrollments from this one particular catchment. They were like, well, there's no transport links. So it was being able to get that information with the people who could set up the transport links that then meant they could put on a service that meant we got more enrollments. But that's not the principal negotiating with the bus company. They just want to know general kind of overview. So even within the one data set, there's kind of all these layers and possible uses, from, rightly or wrongly, I guess, the top of the hierarchy in the school. Different people are going to use it, use the information in different ways. Just like when you look at budgets for faculties or year groups or areas of the school, that's very different to the way a principal or executive team are looking at potentially a whole school budget. It's just different.
Yeah, and also the ability to be able to adapt your reporting, your storytelling to what's going on in the school at that time of year, or with what's going on with certain challenges or going on in the wider environment of the school is really important, because sometimes a report or a set of data that you're presenting or reporting on frequently all of a sudden become less important or even irrelevant if you're not providing a data set that's really the information that's needed right now to deal with something that's going on in the school. So just being able to have your processes and your systems and your report templates and whatever software you're using that can work with you to help you adapt to those different scenarios is super important as well. Because it's a little bit like when you get a novel, and it's sometimes the novel is written by they write it again and it's done by someone else's perspective, another character in the book. That's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to tell this is the side of the story that you need to hear right now.
Yeah, and I guess it's interesting, even from that idea of the different characters' perspective. We're exactly the same. Like, we can do a really factual, objective analysis, but there's actually a whole lot of gray when we look at data, and we're choosing the right things to include in the story. So your perspective of the same data set might be a little bit different to what I see as being a trend or an insight or a pattern or useful or not. And so we've almost kind of got to approach it quite humbly. And it's like, these are the things that I believe that are going to be most useful to you, knowing what you've asked and knowing what questions you have, but equally kind of recognizing that what I see is not the only thing
That's a
that's
really good
possible to
point.
be said.
Yeah, that's right. All data can be interpreted in different ways. And somebody approaching it with a different focus, a different lens, because what they're working on or being challenged in the school might look at the data which you might think is even not irrelevant or unuseful, going, oh no, that's actually helpful. I need that because of X, Y, Z. I can use that in this scenario. That's really useful. And I think also as business managers, who primarily are the audience of this podcast, is just being able to understand that whatever you may be presenting, though it is data, isn't necessarily fact.
Yeah, 100%. And it's data never tells us what to do. It's the prompt to ask questions, and I guess in the past, the use of data in organizations has gone through these different generations over time. And 15, 20 years ago, the use of data was very like, it was a tell. I would tell you what was in the data and what was important and what you had to do with it. Whereas we're at this kind of space where it's far more democratic and it's a lot more conversational and there's a lot more dialogue. And so, you might present to a board or present to colleagues, and you present the things you've noticed and seen. And actually, we've got to be really okay with somebody going, oh, I didn't notice that. I actually thought that this thing was really like a key insight for me, or that this thing really stood out. And I think about it like whatever code of football you follow. I think about, when a penalty is given, supporters on opposite teams don't necessarily agree with the decision of the penalty,
Definitely
but
don't.
we're collecting, we're using the same data, we're seeing the same thing, but it's the saying, we see the world not as it is, but as we are.
That's right. The referee will see it different to the VAR and everybody else. That's right.
Exactly.
And I think when I said earlier about the data may not necessarily be fact, what I mean by that is there may be other data or another viewpoint that actually changes what your conclusion is about what that data is saying. And another big factor I feel in that is when we're heavily focused only on financial information and don't take the context of the non-physical information or data that might be available. So it's very good when financial data and numbers are presented that another stakeholder may go, okay, and I've got this data set, let's add this into the picture, and how does this change the story?
Mm.
That's a really important thing to do in this collaborative process of using data and reporting. Have you had much experience in seeing that in schools where and the use of non-physical data as a data set?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I talk a lot about the difference between quantitative and qualitative data. And the listeners of this podcast are probably very heavy in the quantitative space, which is the numbers in our spreadsheets. But we know that there is so much information. Like you think about all the data that sits in school strategic plans and annual improvement plans and all of the other, as you say, the context, the emails, the perceptions of staff, parents, students, community. Back to the attendance kind of example I used before, the school that I was in was thinking about, well, how do we expand enrollments? And kind of they identified in the numbers and the geographical information in the suburbs where we were not getting students from. But equally, like they could have doubled down on getting the bus and made the assumption that, oh, well, it's just the transport link that's the problem. But they actually didn't know from looking at the numbers and looking at the spreadsheets whether or not the people in that catchment wanted to send their kids to the school. So they did a really good job of employing a HR firm that went out and did focus groups in that area and met with parents at local primary schools and had conversations with them and said, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, if there was a bus, if there were transport links, how likely would you be to send your kid there? And so they went and kind of coupled the qualitative, the perception data with what they knew about the demographics and the numbers to then inform this decision. And it was really successful because they sought information from a range of sources and put in a solution that did serve the community because the community, it was clear, actually really wanted to be able to send their students to that school, but they couldn't get them there.
Yeah,
So,
that's a great
yeah.
example. That's really good. And you talking of examples, you mentioned earlier as well about where you've experienced poor storytelling, and where it's not been very effective. What are the normal trip up points that you've seen when people are not doing a very good job of storytelling with the data?
Yeah. I sat next to a guy on a plane about 2 years ago, and I'll never forget it because it was like he was editing a slideshow, like on paper with a pen, and it was slide after slide after slide, like no word of a lie. I reckon there was 50 slides, and there would have been 2 to 3 charts per slide. And I would never have said anything to him. I didn't, obviously, because I'm not that person. But I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, mate, I'm a data person, and you would have lost me in the first 3 to 4 slides. Like you mentioned cognitive load before. We have a really short space of, I guess, or capacity to take in new information. Every time we look at a graph, when we're presented with it for the first time, we've got to think, okay, what does it represent? What does the axis mean? What are the values? Like, what's the general pattern? There's a lot of thinking that happens even when we show people one visualization. So when we just dump visual after visual after visual, um, it's not helpful at all. The the length of sharing is also not great. So I encourage people when they're doing like a proper data story in the way that I teach it, I really encourage people to think about how do you keep it to about the length of a TED talk, like 12 to 15 minutes. Um, we know that people's attention span is getting shorter. We know the prevalence of and the use of reels on TikTok and Insta and other social media. It's like our attention span is absolutely shortening and shortening, and we've got to cater for that. Um, but it's even for the real numbers people, the real data people, they're just not going to have capacity. And often I see, and you think about board meetings, or even staff meetings, they're often held after school or at night when people are tired. They're not cognitively at their best anyway. And so sitting there listening to a presentation that's just disconnected from what I need to know, want to know, what's useful, just overwhelmed with visuals, goes on too long. Yeah, I'm walking away going, yeah, cool. I
Yeah,
just sat through the
no,
worst
I'm glad you
stuff.
said that because I think it's one of the other things we see quite often, with finance reports especially, is the inability to actually recognize that the stakeholders that you're presenting to are going to be able to accept information in a very different way that you naturally want to present it, as especially if you're an accountant minded person.
Yeah.
And how often in school governance meetings especially have you got a room of non-financial people? So think
Yeah.
a little bit about the black and white tables and the spreadsheets and the financial reports, of how effective that story is going to be received by a stakeholder group that are going to prefer information in chart basis, or in infographics, or having KPI traffic lights and things like that that they
Yeah.
can relate to. Not everybody, surprisingly, understands a balance sheet. I don't understand why, but apparently don't. So,
Right.
it's what you know, but it's not necessarily what everybody else is going to enjoy. And if you ever want an example of that, just ask your friends which sort of books they're reading at the moment, and find out how diverse the interest is on the different novels and the different books that everyone's reading. Everyone has
Exactly.
different interests, don't they? So I think it's very important to remember that, especially when presenting your financial information.
Yeah, absolutely. And, obviously with boards, you always need to prepare those financial reports and send them prior to. And the reason they actually need to be done before is to give people time to read and consume the information. And I think that's true for any data or any data visualizations. There's some people who in the moment can pick it up really quickly and they don't need pre-reading time. But I mean, I recommend this for everybody who's ever running a meeting and presenting data to the people in the meeting. If you can send it 24 hours before, just to give people at least 24 hours, just to give people a chance to look at it, to think about it, to process it if they want to. They don't have to take it up, but also to frame it with some guiding questions. We've also got people who sit on boards, we've got people who work in our schools who they kind of might be proficient enough with looking at numbers, but they may not know what questions to ask or how to engage with it. So even asking kind of 2 or 3 prompting questions and giving those to people before the meeting just gives them, as I say, like some people may not take it up because they don't have time or they don't feel they need to. But for the people who are aware that this is maybe a gap for them and they want to get better, it just gives them that brain space to do the thinking themselves, not having to do it on the spot. And then, like, it actually means that we have more productive conversations in the meeting time because they know where the conversation's going to go and they've had a chance to prep. Rather than just putting people on the spot and going, I know if I'm put on the spot and I can't think, I'm like, I'm not coming up with my best stuff. Um, it's far better, when I've had a chance to think about what my position is on something and then
Yeah,
I can share
absolutely.
it.
And also, like, there's always going to be some people that are going to love numbers. There's going to love the lot of data, the financials, or there might be a lot of data that backs up the story you're trying to say. So that's all good, but put that in an appendix, or add it at
Yeah,
the end of the report. But just make sure that the headlines or the executive summary or the actual body of the report that you're presenting is still telling the story in which you want to put across. And I think, to me, the overall point from what our chat today is for us as leaders in schools or as business managers, is to fully accept the responsibility we have of being storytellers, that we're not just providing information and we're not just providing data. We know that data extremely well. It's what we absorbed in every day of our working life. We've prepared the reports, and if we've understood what the objectives are of the stakeholders that we're presenting to, we have a responsibility, therefore, to make sure that we clearly and concisely are putting across the right story for that moment to help that leadership team or stakeholder group to confront or deal with or make the right strategic decisions based on it. There is a
yeah,
responsibility. I think it's not just a tick and flick job of we've got a month end checklist, we've got to get the data done, we've got to get the reports done. There's the board report pack done. Phew, I've done that now.
yeah, yeah.
The storytelling element is the most crucial part to it.
Yeah, 100%. And part of that's also continuing to upskill ourselves. We get new tech platforms, there's new data coming into schools. Yes, there's obviously some information that's going to stand the test of time and be long lasting, but I often talk about people's data literacy, and we've got to be open and adaptable to learning about new things and new products and new tech when it comes available, so that we can then use that in the best way possible for others. Um, One other thing, just as you were kind of talking before, that I'd love to add is also thinking about when we choose the visuals that go in a report or go in an executive summary, is to think about what are those visuals that are the absolute like best, that are going to give the best kind of bang for buck. Like if you're trying to
don't put graphs in for the sake of it just because you don't want to put numbers in.
yeah, exactly.
It's just you can have information overload in the same way.
Yeah. So it's kind of choosing the right visual, but then also it's using a couple of visual techniques to draw the reader's attention to the part you want them to pay attention to. So it kind of breaks the maths rules a little bit, but I often overlay, like on Excel, I often overlay straight lines. I color code like quadrants. Like I just make a rectangle. I make like a green. I make it green. I make it transparent, and I overlay it over the top of the part that's good and green. And then if I do like a yellow section and a red section, it just helps the user make sense, and it gives them a bit more context about what is happening, say, in a line graph. So if you've got a line graph that used to be kind of in the green and good, goes down into the yellow, it's now in the red, without the color coding, that's harder to represent. So we can kind of just use those visual techniques, like even the arrows and stuff that you can drop in on Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel, like literally point to the data point that you want people to look at. There's no harm in annotating, adding in additional kind of I guess language or explanation around what's happening. I guess don't stick to the rules we learnt in maths in high school, which was, a very clear, keep it all clean and keep the x-axis this, like this, your title should be this, and the title of the chart should be this.
Be creative with maths.
Yeah, absolutely, be creative. And you can even, instead of your chart title being the old school maths, this versus this over time or whatever, you can actually change it to what's the message that you want people to see in the chart.
What's the name of your story? Yep.
Yeah, like that this metric has been declining over the last 5 years. Like that's actually your title. That can be your title. And it does break the maths rules a little bit, so the maths purists may not love that. But from a consumer perspective, it absolutely helps me take in that information and helps me know what you're trying to tell me in the story.
And there's nothing wrong with putting note points in there as well, and like a lot of reference books where you have a glossary or an appendix in there. Yep. Use hyperlinks to drill down into further detail that support that story that you're showing with that data set. Absolutely. Yep. But make sure your headline story gets told. I think that's the overlying message from this, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, that's been absolutely fascinating. I think me and you could talk about this all day, but we want to make sure we keep that attention span down, like you said. That's super important too. We really hope it's been useful to people that have been watching this today on the podcast. Love having you on with us today as a guest. We really appreciate it. And all the best with your storytelling going forward. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Business of School podcast. We've enjoyed the conversation today and would love to have you join us for future episodes. Please hit the subscribe button and follow the links below to find more information and resources to support you and your school team. Until next time, keep being innovative, keep being awesome, and remember, there is always opportunity to improve on the journey. Thanks for connecting.